Welcome to my true criminal abode. You are, as always, very, very welcome. Okay, today's case. Now, the last couple of cases that we have done have been so heavy. We have done Stephen Stainer and Carrie Stainer. They were heavy cases, they were long cases. So today, for today's case, I thought a little bit of light relief is what's needed. So today's case is about the hand in the trunk. It sounds weird, right? It is weird. It's a quirky little case. I like it. So that's why I'm doing it, just because I like it. There's no trigger warnings. There's some kidnap, but there's nothing too horrendous. I mean, claustrophobia, perhaps. If you suffer from claustrophobia, you might not like it. It's about a man stuck in a trunk of a car. But other than that, it's a quirky little case. It's a nice little case because it's kind of resolved. There's a happy-ish ending, I guess. You know, everyone turns out okay. So it's a nice little case. And it's also a case about journalistic integrity. It's about two men, two journalists who don't give up, and they're determined to find this car, find this hand that's sticking out of a trunk, and their persistence is what ultimately saves this man's life. And journalists get a lot of slack these days, and so it's just quite nice to do something that shows some journalistic integrity, journalists doing good for once, because like I say, I don't know, they're not all great these days, are they? So yeah, so it's a quick case, very, very quick. You won't be here for long at all, which is great after the last two cases, which were something like 5 hours in total. So yeah, this won't take very long at all. Okay, so we are going to Saturday the 5th of May 1979, so a wee while back. And we are going to Birmingham, Alabama. And we're going to the news offices there. And on that day, Mark Winne, who was an intern reporter, and Jerry Ayres, who was a veteran photographer, they turned up to work as usual on this weekend day at the news offices in Birmingham. And little did they know that this day would be the day they'll save a man's life. So on this day, the news editor, Garland Reeves, he was listening to the radio in the office, and he was listening with interest. It was a police scanner that he was listening to. And on this scanner, there were some very strange reports going on, that basically people were spotting, driving along the interstate, a car which just seemed to have a hand sticking out of the trunk. And Garland was listening to this radio thinking, what on earth? Is this a hoax? He didn't have a clue whether it was genuine or not. And the police, from the sounds of it, they were really struggling to catch up with this car because it's 1979. So what was happening was people were reporting, well, they would see the incident, they would see the car, but it's 1979, there's no mobile phones. So by the time somebody spotted the car, then drove somewhere to be able to get to a telephone box to contact the police and say, there's a hand sticking out of a trunk of a car, yada yada. Obviously by that point, the car is long gone. And so the police can't find the car because of this delay between seeing the car, getting to a payphone, calling the instant in, the police getting there, the car's gone. And so Garland Reeve is like, I don't know what's going on. So he decided to send Mark Winne and Jerry Ayres out to go and see if they can spot this car, or at least follow the police around. I think the idea was for them to follow the police around. And then eventually they, like the police, when they do catch up with the car, they'll be there to be able to get some photographs and get a report on it. So that was the idea. So the two men headed out. Ayres was driving. He was the vintage photographer, so being the older and more knowledgeable of the two men, he was driving the car. And Mark Winne, the intern reporter, he was in the passenger seat. So they begin driving around and driving around and driving around. For a long time, they were driving around. And all the while that they're driving around, they've got a radio in their car. So they're maintaining radio contact with Garland Reeves, who is back in the office, and he's listening to the scanner and to the police radio. So Garland Reeves back at the office is saying to Winne and Ayres, a report's come through and the car was last spotted in this location, so off Mark and Jerry would head. So there was this communication between the office and the car. But they're driving around and around and around Birmingham. And they're driving around for about 3 hours. 3 hours? I mean, that's some persistence to be driving around for that long. Now, I get car sick, so I'm not sure I would have lasted that long. But they were determined. I mean, back in 1979, it quite literally would have been like looking for a needle in a haystack, just driving around the interstate relentlessly. So anyway, they're driving around and it's been like 3 hours. And all of a sudden, Winne spots it. He spots a beat-up beige Dodge Polara. And lo and behold, there actually is a hand sticking out of the trunk, wiggling its fingers about. This was no hoax. There actually was a hand sticking out of this trunk. So they're travelling northbound on the interstate in Ensley, which is the Birmingham area, and they decide to give chase. I mean, they're not going to let this car disappear. Because, of course, it's easier for them compared to sort of everybody else driving around. They've got to go and find a payphone. Whereas for Winne and Ayres, they've got access to the radio back at the office. So they can then radio Garland Reeves and tell them exactly where they're going. And Garland Reeves, in the process, can then be on the phone to the police at the same time. So it'll be easier for the police to catch up and find them. So whilst they're waiting for the police, they're obviously giving chase to this car. And they could see inside the car that there was a female driver and there were 2 male passengers. And then, of course, the poor dude with his hand sticking out the trunk. So they're pursuing this car, waiting for the police. And they're pursuing it for about 30 minutes, about half an hour, which is quite a while, really, especially as they have no idea who these people are. These people could be dangerous. They could stick a gun out the window at them. Anything could happen. They don't know at all who these people are, but they don't give up. They are following this car. There is clearly somebody in distress in the trunk of this car. It's trying to get attention. It's wiggling about. They have to do something. So for half an hour, they are in pursuit of this car, hot on its heels. And at one point, even because they've got jobs to do, right? So at one point, don't forget, the photographer, Jerry Ayres, he's the one driving the car with Mark Winne, the intern reporter, in the passenger seat. And so Jerry Ayres needs to get some pictures. He's driving the car. And so Mark Winne, he leans over and takes the wheel. And then, I don't know, I'm going this way. In America, it would be that way. No, would it be that way? Oh, I don't know which way it is. Oh, which side do you drive on in America? You drive on the right, which means where does the driver sit? On the left. Because we sit on the right, so you must be on the left. So I did it right the first time. Oh my goodness me. Okay, so Mark Winne is in the passenger side and Jerry Ayres is the photographer. And so Mark Winne leans over and takes the wheel of the car so that Jerry Ayres can hang out of the window and take his pictures. They get some really good pictures, by the way. They're good at what they do. But as you can imagine, this car with the hand sticking out of the trunk, the driver, the female driver, she can obviously see at the back some dude hanging out of the window with a camera. So she realises that she's being followed. So she hits the gas. She drives off the interstate into residential areas. And Winne and Ayres, they're still in pursuit, interweaving all over the place around residential streets, determined not to lose this car. And they don't lose the car. Eventually, the police turn up and they're able to kind of block the car off and stop the car. Obviously, Winne and Ayres are there to capture the whole thing. So we have all these photographs of the arrest. The police obviously straight away go to the car and, pull out the driver and the 2 male passengers. So the female driver was a 24-year-old woman called Robin Green. She was from Birmingham. And one of the male passengers was 27-year-old Joseph Fendley, and he was from Morris. And then also in the car was Joseph's uncle, Wilburn Fendley, from Bessemer. So obviously those three are arrested straight away. And the police rush around to the trunk of the car, not sure what they're going to find, and free the man inside. So the man that climbed out of the trunk was 35-year-old Gary Collier. And he was groggy, he was confused, he was dishevelled, he was barefooted, he was a mess, as you would be being locked in the trunk of a car. Despite that, he gets out of the car and the first thing he does is ask for a cigarette. That's so 70s, right? Anyway, he was all right. He was asking for a cigarette. I mean, I'd be asking for a brandy, So I don't blame the guy. So obviously, he tells the police what happened to him and why he was in the trunk of this car. And in a nutshell, he'd been out the night before to a bar in Bessemer. And at this bar, he met the driver, Robin, and one of the passengers, Joseph Fendley. And he'd never met them before, but he met them at this bar and they were drinking together. And at about 9 p.m, he says that they started taking some drugs, so he decided to leave. So he went out to the car park, and all of a sudden, Robin and Joseph were on him and attacking him. They beat him unconscious and they stabbed him with a screwdriver. Ooh, that's painful. So the poor guy, he's been beaten unconscious, stabbed with a screwdriver and thrown into the trunk of a car. And the reason for this is because Robin and Joseph wanted to steal Gary's disability check. That's it. That's it. So this disability check was worth about $350, which doesn't sound a lot, but back in 1979, it was probably around about $1,400. So it's not a small check, but it's still not worth beating somebody unconscious and stabbing them with a screwdriver over and then throwing them in the trunk of a car. Now, why they threw him in the trunk of the car is very mysterious, because you just leave him in the car park and get away. So I don't know, maybe they'd had too much to drink, maybe they had taken the drugs by this point and they'd gone to their head. I don't know. It's very weird why you would rob somebody and not just scarper rather than throwing them in the trunk of the car. Because then what happens is, these people are really stupid. They're driving around and around Birmingham area. They don't know what to do with this guy in the trunk of their car, because I don't think they planned to put him there. I mean, I don't know. I could be wrong. Maybe they did plan it. But to me, they clearly don't know what they're going to do, because they're driving around and around. In fact, they were driving around for so long that poor old Gary, he thought that they were in another state or another 2 states away, because they had been driving for so long. They were driving for approximately 14 hours. That's a long frickin' time. They didn't know what they were going to do. And at some point, they picked up the uncle, this third passenger. And Gary's not quite sure where along the route they picked him up, but I'm guessing they picked him up because they didn't know what they were going to do. But poor old Gary, he could hear them in the front, basically talking about where they were going to dispose his body. So they had plans to kill him. They had plans to dispose his body somewhere. But why over a disability check? It's kind of mad, really. I just think, in my opinion, I just think they got themselves into a bit of a pickle and they didn't know what to do with the body. They were driving around. They didn't seem to be like murderers. They didn't just murder the guy straight away, although they beat him and stabbed him with a screwdriver, so they're still not pleasant people. But whether they knew what to do when it came to full-blown murder, it doesn't really sound like it. So they're driving around for 14 hours not knowing what to do and where to put this body. So, like I said, poor old Gary's stuck in this trunk of the car, and he's listening to these people planning on disposing his body. So he has to do something, and this is where he rips a hole in the seal of the trunk, and he's able to stick his fingers and then hand out enough that he can attract attention. And, well, he hoped, I mean, obviously he's inside the trunk, he can't see outside at all. If you're in there, stuck in there for 14 hours, presumably you're going to be thinking after a little bit, nobody can see me. He hasn't got a clue that people are seeing him, people are calling the police, something is being done. But the poor man can't see any of that. So all he can do is just, as much as he can, wave his fingers about. But what you've got to remember as well, the exhaust fumes are coming up into the trunk. So on top of this, on top of being stabbed and beaten unconscious, he's got the exhaust fumes coming in, and he's basically drifting in and out of consciousness because of the exhaust fumes. I mean, this is what kills people. So he was blinking lucky that he didn't die from this. For 14 hours, having the exhaust fumes coming in like this. No wonder he was drifting in and out of consciousness. So it must have been absolutely terrifying. Terrifying for this guy. But even though he'd been driving around for 14 hours and thought he'd left the state, his kidnappers were just driving around in circles. When the police picked the car up or stopped the car, it was actually 10 miles away from the bar. 10 miles. 10 miles. So they'd clearly been driving around in circles, clueless, not knowing what to do. 10 miles away, how does that even happen? How do you drive around for 14 hours and end up 10 miles away from where you started? That's insane. But the poor guy, I mean, he basically said that he'd made his peace. In other words, what he was saying was he was convinced he was going to die. I mean, you would be, wouldn't you? And he'd made his peace with God. It's what I gather from that. He'd made his peace and kind of was ready to die, which is horrible, to be in that situation where you genuinely think you're going to die, waiting for rescue and not sure if anybody can see you. But yeah, but people could see him, and Winne and Ayres, they weren't going to give up. And I genuinely believe, thanks to them, because the police were obviously having a really difficult time tracking him down. And I'm not sure, with, him being stabbed and with the fumes coming in, I'm not sure how much longer he could have gone for. I mean, I'm no doctor, but it sounds like he couldn't have kept going that much longer before giving into the fumes, at least. So I do genuinely think they either helped to literally save his life, or they helped to stop things getting worse and for the consequences to have been far, far worse, for, long-term kind of sickness from this. Even your mental health would be like, you'd be a nervous wreck. Well, I would anyway. And like I said at the beginning, I mean, the claustrophobia of being trapped inside somewhere, not able to get out for 14 hours, that's horrible. But like I say, it's kind of a happy ending because Winne and Ayres, thanks to them, well, they either saved him or it came to a head a lot sooner than it would have done. Now, unfortunately, it's 1979. There doesn't seem to be much in existence for court records. And we have no idea what actually happened to Robin Green and Joseph Fendley. There's no court records. So we don't know. I mean, obviously they were arrested, but what sentence they actually got, we don't know. It's a bit mysterious. Let's just hope that they got a decent punishment because, okay, a man didn't end up being murdered, but he probably would have been. And just the trauma for 14 hours being stuck in the trunk of a car, they deserved a hefty punishment. So I really hope they got it. We do know what happened to Wilburn, though. The charges against him were actually dropped. And the reason for this is because he wasn't actually at the bar when Gary was attacked. He wasn't part of it. You would think just being an accomplice afterwards would have got him something, but apparently not. And the charges against him were dropped. To be fair, he wasn't part of the original plan, but he still, by the sounds of it, didn't do anything to stop them. Unless he did. I mean, I don't know. Maybe they picked him up quite early and they were driving around because he was stopping them. I don't know. Nobody knows. It's all a bit mysterious. Without any court records, we can only speculate, really. So Mark Winne, the intern reporter, he continued his career. I think they were both a little bit famous after this for, well, 5 minutes. 5 minutes of fame, from what I can gather. But he's had a long, successful career, and I think he's still doing it. He works for WSB TV in Atlanta. I believe he's still there. He's had a long running career anyway. Jerry Ayres and Garland Reeves, they've both retired now. I mean, this was 1979, so it was like 40 odd years ago. Gosh, yeah, that was a long time ago. Wow, that's just made me feel really old. It doesn't feel that far back. It's like you say the 70s, 80s, 90s, and it sort of feels like 10, 20 years ago. It doesn't feel like getting on for 50 years ago. So, yeah. So, yeah, they're retired. Now, as for Gary Collier, what happened to him was also a little bit mysterious. We don't know. Now, there was a Gary Collier that seems to match everything that died in 1989. It's believed that this is the Gary Collier. I can't say with 100% certainty, but it sure looks that way, that the Gary Collier that died in 1989 is the same Gary Collier, which was only about 10 years after the event, so quite young, really. Now, don't forget he was robbed for his disability check, so it's quite possible that he had some kind of disability anyway, and maybe that's the reason that he died younger, or maybe it was something else. Nobody really knows at all. But if it is him, if it's the one in 1989, then it was only 10 years after the kidnap, so he wasn't very old at all when he died, which is quite sad. But at least thanks to Winne and Ayres, he got an extra 10 years of his life, so he might not have at all if people hadn't got to him when they did. So yeah, that is the story of the hand in the trunk. It's a slightly bizarre one, but it's also kind of a nice one, isn't it, really? It's sort of a happy-ish ending and shows the persistence of human nature and being determined to do the right thing. So that's good. But there is actually quite an important message as well that we can take away from this. And that is that if you are stuck in the trunk of a car, whether you're kidnapped or you lock yourself in because you're a bit stupid, then just remember Gary Collier. Remember what he did. Remember to just get your hand out somehow. You can remove the seal like he did. You can bash out the lights. It's all about attracting attention. And what I have discovered through this case, which I found interesting, and I had no idea, that actually for the last 20 odd years, at least this is the case in America. So if you're outside of America, check the regulations wherever you are. I imagine it's pretty standard now everywhere. I don't see why it wouldn't be. But basically, for the last 20 odd years, it is actually a safety requirement that cars have a safety mechanism in the trunk of the car, or the boot of the car if you're in the UK like I am. We call it the boot. I keep going to call it the boot for this case, so I've done quite well calling it the trunk all the way through because it's different to what we say. But anyway, yeah, there is a safety mechanism. It's glow in the dark. You should be able to see it. Now, it sounds wacky. You'd be thinking, there can't be that many people being kidnapped that there needs to be an actual safety mechanism in the trunk of the car, the boot of the car. But I saw a video the other day. Somebody had kidnapped a woman who was in the trunk of the car, and the car stopped at a petrol station, and all of a sudden the trunk lid just popped up and she just legged it. But one of the big reasons that they made it mandatory is actually quite sad. It's because, well, one, it does help when people are kidnapped. But one of the reasons is because children are actually dying. Not because children are being kidnapped or anything, but just because kids being kids, they would hide from their parents or whatever. They would get in the trunk. And they were actually suffocating from the carbon monoxide, like Gary was. And a number of children have actually died from being stuck in the trunk of a car, which is really tragic. But as a result, there is this glow-in-the-dark safety mechanism, which hopefully you will find if you're in a newer car. Like I say, it's sort of the last 20 years. So if you're in a really old car, then hopefully it's not going to be as strong and you can break seals and push out lights and all that stuff. But if it's a newer car, and like I say, I mean, this is regulations in the States, so outside the States, maybe check it out and see what your regulations are. But I don't see why it wouldn't be pretty standard everywhere. There should be this mechanism. So if you know about this mechanism, well done you. And you're probably thinking, my God, she's stupid. Yeah, all right. All right. I had no idea. I literally had no idea. I mean, me and cars, I find them pretty boring. You know, they're cool to drive, but I don't need to know how they work. Unless I'm kidnapped. And now I do. So there you go. And hopefully you do too. And hopefully, well, I was going to say, hopefully I've saved your life, but hopefully I haven't saved your life because I don't want you to be kidnapped and in the trunk of a car. But it's good to know, right? Hopefully I've given you some information, some knowledge today. All right, so that's me done. Hopefully I haven't made you feel too claustrophobic today. Yeah. You be kind, you look after yourselves, do good in this crappy world, and don't get kidnapped and stuck in the boot of a car or the trunk of a car. See, I'm slipping now. I need to go because I don't know where I am anymore. Bye-bye.